All sails set. Chapter 8. The flying cloud in the roaring forties. We see the Corposant tragedy off Cape Horn. The flying cloud was in the roaring forties, running down her easting. Here, for 9 months of the year, the great westerlies blow true to their name. Their direction never varies, but their strength rises gradually to hurricane fury. For thousands of miles there is nothing to stay their force, nor deflect the driving power of the league-long seas. We were running with our lee rails under. It was a quartering sea that held little threat, and the old man crowded the canvas on the cloud till she fled like a deer with the wolves at her heels. Day after day, when the log was hove, she was reeling a full 15 knots. And the man holding the reel was put to it to keep his arm from being jerked from its socket. But suddenly, with the crossing of the 45th parallel, the weather broke up. The cold became more searching. All day the wind had been stiffening, and a dirty sea was making. The ship was still wearing everything but her royals, staggering now under the tremendous press of canvas. The mate, wedged into a corner of the monkey rail, let her drive. We apprentices had been literally drowned out of our half-deck and forced to take up our quarters in the forecastle with the rest of the crew. The older men clumped below, cursing the mate for not reefing the togants when the watch was changed, delaying it in order to call all hands and thus ruin a watch below. "Might as well set up and stay awake," growled Caleb Winthrop. "Small use going to sleep just to be woke up again." "He'll have the sticks out of her afore long, mark my words," grumbled Ben Backstay. "Showing off, that's what he's doing. Ain't he ever going to take in them togants?" "Nobody'd care if 'twas a proper hurricane," complained Caleb. "But the old fuel makes a hurricane hazard out of an ordinary gale by carrying twice the canvas a single watch could handle. Blast his boots and breeches." Herded together in the sodden forecastle, with only the thickness of a few planks between them and the outer activity, and the trained ear of the old salt deciphered each sound from aloft. The sudden whip of canvas and the grunting cries of men hauling on the clewlines told them that the togansels were finally coming in. "'Bout time, too," they grumbled. The smoking oil lamp swung in its gimbal with every pitch and roll of the ship. Only a small area of the forecastle being lighted by its dim glow, the rest was lost in darkness, as deep as the gloom that settled upon our spirits. There was no heat in the forecastle, and no means of drying our clothes. Most of the men turned into their bunks without even removing their oilskins. Others, with more courage than logic, stripped and wrung water out of their clothes and wrapped themselves up in their wet blankets. The howl of the wind was all about us. The whole ship shuddered under the impact of the seas that struck at her over the weather bulwark. We huddled there in our bunks and perched on our sea chests, awaiting the return of Zeke Rilling, who had volunteered to wheedle Doctor into making some hot coffee. None of us liked Rilling, but we hoped for our stomach's sake that he would be successful. We hated him because he was a bully who, like most of his breed, was a coward at heart. But the bluster of his bellow and the massive power of his shoulders held back all but the more intrepid from crossing his wake. He seemed to take special pleasure in taunting Marat, a diminutive Frenchman. Marat, who was a splendid sailor, had a sharp tongue and an explosive nature of so many of his race. It was known that he carried a knife against his lean ribs, and we all feared that one day, when Rilling should have goaded him beyond endurance, there would be bloodshed. "I tell ye, I'm through with ships," muttered Ben Backstay, wringing the water out of his beard and trying to dry his pipe over the smoking lamp chimney. "When a man reaches my time of life, he ought to be setting in front of the fire, filling his pipe and his bread basket. Here I am, froze to the marrow, Eatin' dog food and gettin' no more sleep than a nervous cat. 'Tain't right, I'm tellin' ye. For a man of my years, I'm through with the sea. Once I set my foot ashore again, I'm a-gonna raise beans and pertaters till Gabriel sounds the horn." He spat with an air of finality. We all knew that he'd been swearing this promise for 40 years. The door banged open. Against the pale rectangle of light, we could see Zeke Rilling, empty-handed. No hot coffee. We groaned. The sea smashed against the bulwark, and its overflow piled into the forecastle through the open door and raced across the floor, taking oilskins, pannikins, and whatnot in its wake. "Shut that door!" screamed Marat, beside himself with Latin fury. The utter wretchedness of our plight, our chilled bodies, our empty stomachs, our broken, fitful slumber, seemed to have brought to a climax something seething in the little Frenchman's soul. That Zeke Rilling, his hated tormentor, should have brought about this climax was an irony in keeping with their antagonism. Deliberately, Rilling held the door open. Another sea swept into the forecastle, filling the bunk on the lee side of the door, leaving us all standing in a foot of water. "Come on, Zeke," growled Olson. "Shut dot door." Zeke Rilling slammed the door and strode over to the circle of light, under which Marat crouched on his sea chest. "And who do ye think you are, giving me orders?" he snarled. "I'm a mind to smarten you up with the weight of my fists, you dirty little frog." Marat rose from his sea chest. There was something so ominous in his movement that we held our breath. No man made a sound. For a second it seemed that even the elements had paused to listen. The light from the lamp flickered over the two figures. It picked them out of the darkness and left them standing on the edge of an abyss. Neither man would ever be the same after this moment. "Dirty little frog, am I?" Marat's voice was edged like a blade. Suddenly it rose to a scream. "Take that from a frog!" Like a flash of light, he leaped and drove both his feet low into Rilling's belly. Zeke Rilling staggered and all but lost his footing, while a grunt of pain broke from his lips. He straightened up and glowered at Marat. The rest of us stood there, rooted, waiting to see murder done. But Marat knew his man. He swaggered up to the bully, whose hulk towered above him so that he had to throw back his head to fling his taunt in the man's teeth. "Eh bien, Mr. Rilling," he jeered. "Why you no fight? Afraid of the little frog, eh?" Zeke Rilling seemed to collapse. He backed away from the Frenchman, stumbled over the sea chest, and fell sprawling onto the sodden bunk behind him. He buried his head and sobbed like a child. The rest of us were suddenly embarrassed, as if we'd witnessed some murky secret of a man's soul that should be hidden from all eyes but his own, and we busied ourselves with our sea boots and lashed oilskins about our bodies. The door banged open, filling the forecastle with the outer thunder, while a voice roared, "All hands on deck! Lay to it, mates! There's the devil to pay aloft!" When we hit the deck, we knew that we were in for it. Rain edged with ice added its hum to the song of the elements. All around was tumult, groaning timber, the whine of taut rope, the rattle of the chain sheets. Above all was the thunder of the breasting seas as they broke over the weather bows and rushed aft along the submerged bulwarks. We dodged along the deck in the lee of the weather rail, trying to get aft without a ducking. Luck was with us. We made the poop ladder without being overtaken by an inrushing of sea, and we ran for the shelter of the lee alleyway. The larboard watch was waiting for us, cursing us for our slowness in relieving them. They moved toward the ladder as if the very joints of their bones were frozen. There came a crack from the foreyard like a volley of shot, then the mighty cannoning of blown-out canvas. "The foretopsail!" cried a voice. In the darkness, we could make out the canvas split to ribbons, torn from the bolt ropes and borne off on the wind. "Foretopsail, halyards!" bellowed the mate. "Tail onto it, you blasted lubbers! What are you waiting for?" Cursing and fumbling in the darkness, we sprang for the halyards, and the yard came down on the run. The old man appeared on the poop, and the order was given to furl the main topsail. The command shouted above the wind by the old man was snapped up by the mates and flung at the men. "Call all hands, Thatcher!" barked Mr. Andrews. I clawed my way to the forecastle door and flung it open to shout into the darkness, "All hands to shorten sail!" A chorus of groans and imprecations was hurled at me as the watch below came tumbling out, without having closed an eye. The main topsail was lowered. The great yard braced to spill the sheet, stiff and heavy with ice. It blew straight out from the yard with a thunder like the salvo of frigate guns, fighting to tear itself loose from the tops that held it. Then it was aloft and furl. The force of the wind flattened us to the ratlines as we made our way up the rigging. Now we were out on the plunging yard, scarce able to see one another for the darkness. Over the yard, on our straining bellies, beating at the sail with numb fists, gathered it up, inch by bitter inch, mastering it. Half an hour later, we slithered down the shrouds and fought our way aft to the mate's call of "Grog ho!" Dawn was no more than a grayish lightening of the skies to the east. Through a narrow rent in the heavens, a gleam of yellow bespoke the fact that a sun still rose in this tumbling world. Now the first of the albatross brought us the Cape Horn greeting. From the upper Patagonian coast on the Atlantic to the same latitude on the Pacific, these birds from a ship's convoy in sunshine or whistling gale. White miracles of grace they are, snowy-breasted with slate markings on their wide wings. Their flight is a fascination to the eye, for the stiffer the wind, the more supreme seems the albatross's mastery of the air. They float and wheel on wings widespread and motionless, save for a scarcely perceptible tilt or lift or lower their elevation. They can run athwart a gale of 80-mile velocity, take it head on, or hang suspended without apparent effort. As they swept low at the masthead, turning their gentle eyes upon us, they seemed to testify to the notion of the old shellbacks who claimed their bodies housed the souls of drowned sailors, and if killed, the wandering ghost would bring disaster upon him who caused it. The older men eyed them with respect and not without affection, but they frowned at the first of Mother Carey's chickens, as they called the stormy petrels. Amusing little fellows these, in mottled jackets of black and white. They darted over the surface of the sea with quick, flitting movements, their slim, trailing legs making them seem almost to be walking upon the water. They were believed to bring dirty weather in their wake, which accounted for their connection with Mother Carey, a mythical old woman of evil reputation. Watching them dart and flicker over the tumbling seas, Tom Plunkett shook his head wisely. "Old Cape Stiff's just round the corner," he warned. The mutineers, whose services were now sorely needed, were released from their irons in the 'tween decks, with the understanding that they would be dealt with when the proper time came. Jeter Sneed, deemed the most dangerous, was left at the end of his yard of chains, where it was ironed to the 'tween decks stanchion. Here he daily hurled curses at the steward, who brought him his hardtack and water. Cape Horn, black named and deserving it. Region of hurricanes, gales, and rain, of sleet and hail and snow, of league-long rollers sweeping up from the Antarctic to break their backs on the coast of Tierra del Fuego. On the ship, days of lowering darkness through which the sun never penetrated, an endless cycle of work in icy water, with frozen hands split to the bone, trying to snug tail in driving squalls of snow and sleet. The ropes heavy with ice, swelling in the throats of the blocks. The flying cloud was driving along under Cape Horn canvas, double reef topsails, foresails, and jib. The helmsmen were lashed to the wheel, fighting it. The old man was braced beside them on the poop, in an anxious furrow between his eyes. A green ship, the flying cloud, untried and as yet by the Horn. How much would she stand? That jib ought to have come in. She was hard-mouthed and bucking the men at the wheel. But it so frequently occurred that a gale, blowing itself out toward night, dictated a need for shortening sail when the need was past. The old man decided that he would let her rip, so rip it was. But Cape Stiff had a trick up her sleeve. The gale didn't blow itself out with nightfall. It freshened. The cloud yawed and scooped up 1,000 tons of green water that smashed at hatch combings and capstans and forecastle as if it would have destroyed them if it could. Even the lifelines stretched along her main deck were hazardous for a man to trust his life to. From horizon to horizon, the graybeards swept mountains, moving invincible, inexorable. Still, the gale freshened in sudden squalls of blasting fury. The seas were mounting, black walls of water whose crests were torn off by the wind, flung into the valleys. They loomed above us, beside us, behind us. They rolled aboard, ready to smash, to kill. It was stand by for both watches and sleep for none. That cochon of a captain, he will kill us all, cursed Marat savagely. For what does he have? For what for? He does not have to. What for does he not heave to? But heavings too was out of the question. To have brought the cloud broadside to those seas, even for 1 second, would have spelled the end for us all. There was naught to do but let her drive. We were huddled on the weather side of the poop, clinging to the rigging and lifelines. A splintering crash at my elbow caused me all but to lose my grip. Where the stern lifeboat had swung from its davits a second before, there was now only empty space. The davits were bent double, the chocks empty, the lashings rent. I think that means the lifeboat was ripped off from the boat. Looking upward, we saw a ghastly phenomenon. From the iron boom, from the boom iron of the straining main topsail yard, a bluish ball of fire paled and flickered. We watched it, tranced with awful fascination, as it moved to the end of the weather yard and vanished in the darkness. The corposant. I found myself shivering with an ague that was like to loose my very teeth from their moorings. Lay out there and furl the jib! The long-expected order, the most dangerous sail on the ship to stow. The foot ropes of the jib boom on which a man must stand, hanging directly over the sea. Out with you, you shiverin' jellyfish! The mate's voice lashed at us like a whip. Nils Olsen, Brick Warner, and I were nearest to him. With a kick and a shove, he propelled us toward the ladder. We crouched for a second, waiting to make a dash for it. Seas were crashing aboard with every roll. Now, we clawed our way across the slippery deck. The forecastle head. Waves slopped over and cracked like thunder behind us as we ran. We climbed between the knightheads and out upon the rearing bowsprit. Feet feeling in the darkness for the swaying foot rope, holding on by a spar and the grace of God. One moment, we were lifted skyward, clinging like limpets to whatever we could hook our fingers into. The next, plunged waist deep in icy water, we worked with the frenzy of the mad. Numb fingers fumbled with the gaskets. Cries tore from our lips, whipped away on the wind. A wave was looming just ahead, livid, monstrous. Out of the clue of my eye, I saw it coming. Nils yelled a warning. Brick, on the end of the boom, didn't hear. I screamed to him at the top of my lungs. The wind shoved my voice down my throat. The wave rushed at us. Blindly, I buried my head, wove myself around rope and boom. The wave struck. The ship trembled to her keel bolts. Stunned, gasping, I felt myself being dragged from my hold. It was Nils' hand grabbing me by the collar, hauling me to the safety of the knightheads. Brick. I looked back. Brick was gone. Oh, God. Man overboard! Man overboard! Shrilled the cry. Then madness let loose. Men clawing their way from aft. Rope! Ropes, you fools! Somewhere out in that trap of black water was Brick. Good old Brick. Shouts, imploring, entreating tore from 100 throats. Brick! Brick! A rope! Lay hold! Where are you, Brick? Where? Orders cracked through the air. Sail had been slacked somehow. Ropes thrashed in wild tangle about the decks. There he is! There! See! Brick! Look! A rope! Brick's head appeared for a second in the foam, close beside the ship. A terrible fear was in his eyes. A wave was rising above him, a giant among giants, a cliff of smoking water. It would sweep him away past all hope of rescue. His hands clutched at rope, closed spasmodically. The wave broke. A wind shrilled a fiercer note. A cry went up from the men. Brick was gone. Hours passed. Days. All sense of time was lost. Only ice and sea and wind and stubborn canvas. Frozen hands, frozen brains, a ship plunging, fighting for life. One man, the captain, meeting the sea as an equal, his skill against the ocean's might. The rest of us were sunk in misery. Somehow we got through our tasks, carried out orders that seemed beyond human possibility, while through our minds the words of Tom Plunkett tolled like a bell. The corposant? Aye, death comes behind it like a cart after a horse. For more than 48 hours the old man had not left the poop, except to go below to glance at the barometer or warm the chill in his veins with a pot of hot coffee. He stood braced beside the helmsman, gray and haggard, silent save to issue an order. There was something timeless and inevitable about him as he stood there, grim with cold, master of his ship and his men, alone in the isolation that is the stuff of command. Many times since the start of the voyage he had been raked by criticism of the forecastle and even by his own first mate, but no man seeing him now felt aught but admiration for him. As he stood there, conning his ship by the sweep of the sea, he was a figure hewn out of marble. The life of every one of us depended upon his judgment, his knowledge, his sixth sense of the true mariner that warned him how much this balanced fabric of wood and canvas would stand without parting. It was this very day that brought his relations with the first mate to a crisis. There came a momentary lull in the storm when the old man went below for a catnap. His steward had broken an arm, and Mr. Andrews detailed me to fetch a pot of coffee from the doctor and take it to the captain. As I stepped into the corridor outside his door, I heard angry voices issuing from within. The old man's and the mate's. The Falklands are only 300 miles to the west of us, the mate was saying. Take my advice and run for them. Your advice, the old man roared. You overreach yourself, mister. Yes, My advice, the mate shouted. The men are done in, I tell you. You'll have a real mutiny on your hands this time. This bloody ship was never built for these seas, and they know it. It's a simple matter to put in at the Falklands and wait for this cursed gale to blow itself out. Mr. Jones, mark this. And the old man's voice was terrible to hear. We are doubling the Horn and standing for Frisco. I've put up with a goodly bit from you since we cleared port. You've shirked your duties abominably, sir, and criticized the other officers and myself within hearing of the men. Now tail on to this. The least sign of insubordination from you in the future, and I will remove you from duty and see that you get your deserts when we reach California. Go ahead then, yelled the mate, beside himself by now. Remove me from duty. I'm sick of killing myself for naught. I tell you, we're never going to get around the Horn. Get to your cabin, thundered the old man. The door flung open so violently before the mate's departure that I was like to be knocked, spinning, coffee pot and all. Thatcher, bellowed the captain, send Chips here with a padlock and hammer. The Cloud was laboring under the weight of water on her decks, unable to shake herself free from one sea before another raced aboard. I fought my way forward to fetch Chips, speculating upon the outcome of this new development between the captain and his first mate, and wondering what Jonah had signed the ship's articles. I looked up to see a wave curling above me over the weather bulwark, almost upon me. Through my mind flashed an old warning of the mates. Never run from a sea. Grab hold of anything you can find and hang on. Blindly I looked. There was nothing. I turned and ran for the poop ladder. The wave cracked like a pistol shot. Water, icy, relentless, rushed up to my stomach, swelled under the legs of my oilskin, poured into my sea boots. I staggered and fell. Another sea sheeted over, bigger than the first. I tried to rise. It swept me away. Overboard? Where was I? Out in that black maelstrom where no man might see the light of day? What an end to life, to drown like a foxhole rat. There was my mother's face, twisted with grief. Messina Clark holding out a hand. Donald McKay watching, speechless. Where was I? The wave flung me against the poop ladder. It left me there, wretched and wrenched in every bone. I crawled to my feet, filled now with blind, reasonless rage. I shook my fists at the sea. Sobs tore at my throat as I cursed it. You bloody sea! You've destroyed Brick. Now you're trying to destroy the flying Cloud. My ship. Well, you shall not, sea. Do you hear? You shall not! Though I shouted with all my power, no sound could I hear of my own voice. The seas swept by with unfaltering swing. Lanny brought back the news from his trick at the wheel that we were off the pitch of the Cape. The Cloud was stripped to double reef topsails on the fore and main. It was all that she could stagger under, and it seemed as if bare sticks would have been enough. Only those 2 squares of canvas, drum tight. The wild swing of the compass card rendered it useless. And throughout the day, the old man conned his ship by the sweep of the seas. From the horizon to horizon, the ocean was one vast mountain range, moving in wild flight. As the Cloud slithered down some smoking slope into a yawning hollow, the water ahead loomed higher than her foreyard. The next second, her bows were surging toward the sky, while her poop sank into the trough, and a cliff of toppling water rose up behind. It was a sight to try the hardiest soul to look astern and see a wall of hissing water rolling up above the taffrail 30, 40 feet. When it seemed that it must certainly overwhelm the ship, she slipped from beneath it with a fathom to spare, and water rushed forward under her counter. There was no chance now to wear or heave to. She fell off for 1 second into the trough of those thundering seas. If she fell off for 1 second into the trough of those thundering seas, we were lost. Nothing to do but let her dive. The men of both watches huddled on the poop, no orders to carry out while the gear held. Nils Olsson and Caleb Winthrop, the best wheelsmen, were lashed to the helm. That means I think they were literally tied to the steering wheel.
Yeah.
The old man stood braced beside them. The place of the first mate, locked in his cabin, was filled by the second. It was impossible to light a fire in the galley, and at midday we washed down Seabiscuit with cold water. The main deck was swept constantly by tons of water. A dash forward was a matter of life and death. As the murky light of day thickened with approaching night, we saw a monstrous wave rolling up astern. Many we had seen, but this appeared the veritable grandfather of giants. It bore down right upon us with an unopposable stride. The cloud, weighted under her burden of water, lay inert, as if she sensed this new attack and lacked the strength to combat it. Of all the disasters that can overtake a ship, there is none more terrifying than being pooped, a running ship overreached by a following sea. Any other part of a ship may be submerged, but her stern is her head, and it must not go under. The old man threw a backward glance over his shoulder and shouted, "Let everything stand! Into the rigging, men! Hang on for your lives!" He leaped to the wheel beside the tense wheelsman. The rest of us sprang into the rigging and swarmed up the ratlines to the maintop. The wave was upon us. High above the taffrail it hung, 50, 60 feet, wiping out the sky. The cloud slid down into an awful hollow, high as the ends of the lower yard arms. The crest curled over with a mighty hiss. Down it crashed. Chaos. Water rushed forward in a cataract of thunder. Everything was swept before it. It was the end of a world. Climbing to the back stays 10 feet above the poop, I was all but torn from my hold. "My God, we're done," I heard a voice cry. As my head cleared, I looked downward. The entire ship was submerged. Nothing visible but her careening spars with dots of men clinging like limpets to her rigging. The sea that had pooped us left disaster in its wake. The compass and binnacle had disappeared. I saw Nils Olsson and the old man clinging by some miracle to the wheel. Caleb Winthrop jammed under the smashed wheel box. The poop was swept clean. The cabin skylight smashed to kindling, and tons of water pouring into the cabin below. The wheelsmen were fighting to keep the cloud from broaching to. With the acuteness of perception that in moments of chaos makes us notice insignificant things, I saw the veins knotting on their foreheads and the white strain of their knuckles. Another sea was rearing astern of us. We could see it coming. A voice cried, "We're done for!" Would the cloud rise? We could not say. The old man could not say. Only God knew. Another bucket of water would finish her. The wave was almost upon her. Slowly, tiredly, the cloud shook herself. Water poured out through her scuppers. Free of its weight, she rallied. For 1 second the wave hung. We watched, tranced with a sense of doom. Then her stern lifted to it. A hoarse cheer tore from the throats of 100 weary men. All through that wild night we drove, but the worst was over. Toward dawn, the gale moderated. The flying cloud had rounded the pitch of the cape and started the long Pacific slant northward. The seas roared aboard no longer. Lifelines were unrigged and reefs shaken out. The to'gantsails set. The royal and skysail yards crossed once again. But that sense of hostility and might of the sea lay heavy on us still. Something fine and bright had gone out from the world. Brick was gone.